Imagine the bustling rhythm of a big city where the streets throb with life even in the dead of night, and in one of those glass skyscrapers that rise above Lake Michigan like sentinels of the modern world, a woman named Megan Carter sits at her desk, staring at a computer screen where graphs and slogans dance in a chaotic dance of creative madness, and she thinks about how it all began not this night, but her whole life, which now seems so predictable, and yet full of hidden cracks ready to widen into a chasm. Megan was the kind of woman everyone thought was perfect. A devoted wife, a mother of two children who were probably asleep in their cozy home on the outskirts of Chicago, being watched over by a nanny because her husband, Nathan, a doctor at a local clinic, was working the graveyard shift today, saving lives, while she was here, struggling to meet advertising deadlines for some trendy cosmetics brand that promised eternal youth, but really just sold illusions in pretty jars. She was 38, but she looked younger, thanks to her genes, her morning yoga, and the inner strength that allowed her to balance her career and her family like a circus acrobat on a tightrope, where one wrong step and everything would go down the drain. Every day, Megan woke up at 5 in the morning, making breakfast for the twins, Emma and Jake, who were both her joy and her chaos. Emma with her endless questions about stars and princesses, Jake with his passion for football and his permanently bruised knees, and Nathan, who kissed her goodbye, mumbling something about a patient with a rare diagnosis before disappearing into his world of scalpels and stethoscopes. She loved him, really, the kind of love that comes from shared memories of college nights in a small apartment, sharing pizza and dreams of the future. And now, 15 years into their marriage, that love had become something warm and reliable, like an old sweater you put on a cold night, but sometimes she wondered where the passion had gone that had once made their hearts beat in unison like drums at a rock concert. Working at Caldwell and Partners was her escape, a prestigious place where creative minds competed for consumers' attention, and Megan, with her sharp mind and talent for persuasion, rose to the position of senior creative director. But it meant late hours, stress, and a constant feeling that she was missing out on something important at home. Today was one of those days when the project was on fire, a campaign for a new organic beauty line that would appeal to the millennial market, and the deadline was looming like a storm cloud over a lake, forcing the entire team to work late into the night. The office, usually buzzing with voices and phone calls, was now nearly empty, with only a few lamps burning in the conference room where Megan and her colleagues had laid out mock-ups, charts, and endless cups of coffee, the aroma of which mingled with the smell of markers and printer ink. "Megan, you're a genius," Ethan Caldwell, her boss, told her when she pitched the idea for the slogan, "Nature in your skin, eternal harmony," and his voice, deep and confident, echoed around the room, causing everyone else to nod in agreement. Ethan was the kind of man people whispered about in smoking rooms. 45 years old, the wealthy heir to the family empire, with the looks of a Hollywood actor, dark hair slightly gray at the temples, eyes the color of the ocean after a storm, and a smile that could melt the Arctic ice. He was powerful, knew everyone in the industry, and his charisma made him not just a boss, but someone you wanted to impress, because one compliment from him was worth more than an end-of-year bonus. They had been working for 6 hours straight now, and the air in the room was heavy with tension as colleagues argued over color schemes, over how to position the logo so it wouldn't blend into the background, and Megan, sitting at the head of the table, felt the fatigue wash over her in waves, but she didn't give in because she knew this was her chance to prove that she was more than just a wife and mother, but a professional who could lead a team to victory. "Let's think about the target audience," she said, her voice firm but with a touch of enthusiasm that was infectious. "These are women who want to feel natural, but also irresistible. The tagline should whisper to them, 'You're already perfect, we're just accentuating it.'" Her assistant, young Lisa, nodded, tapping away at her keyboard. "Megan's right. Let's add infographic elements about natural ingredients, aloe, lavender, anything that sounds like a spa in a bottle." And then Ethan chimed in, leaning closer to the screen where the projector cast shadows across his face. "Great idea, Megan. You always find that angle that others miss. Without you, this campaign would be just another ad, but with you, it's a hit." His words hung in the air, and Megan felt a tiny warmth rise in her, not from the coffee, she was on her third, but from something else, from the way he was looking at her, with a genuine admiration that was rare in the corporate world of fake smiles and sycophancy. The rest of his colleagues began to pack up. "That's enough for today, guys. We'll continue tomorrow," Ethan said, and they all breathed a sigh of relief, packing their bags and muttering about late trains and cabs. But Megan lingered, checking over the last few edits, and when she looked up, Ethan was still there, standing by the window, looking out at the city lights below, shimmering like stars reflected in water. "Aren't you in a hurry to get home?" he asked, turning to face her, and there was a gentleness in his voice that made him not just a boss, but someone you could talk to. Megan smiled, leaning back in her chair. "Nathan's on duty, the kids are with a sitter. What about you? Your wife's probably waiting." She knew Ethan had been divorced for a couple of years. Office gossip flew faster than an email blast, but she asked the question out of politeness, so as not to seem too nosy. Ethan chuckled, coming closer and sitting on the edge of the table, his hand brushing the stack of papers, but there was something casual about the movement, as if they were old friends rather than employees and bosses. "Wife? Oh, that's an old story. My home is an office now, and sometimes a golf course on the weekends. But let's not talk about me. How do you cope with all this? Kids, a doctor husband, and this soul-sucking job. Are you a superhero or something?" Megan laughed, genuinely, heartily, because his words had hit the mark. And in that moment, as their laughter merged into one, she felt a spark, the one that lights up unexpectedly, like a match in the dark, and illuminates everything around with a new light. They decided to take a coffee break. "Here, I'll buy you one. There's a 24-hour coffee machine downstairs," Ethan suggested, and they walked down into the empty hall, where their footsteps echoed off the marble walls, creating the illusion that the whole world had narrowed to that moment. They chatted while the coffee brewed, about random things, about how Ethan had always wanted to be a rock musician, but his dad had pushed him into the business world, and now he played guitar for himself in his apartment overlooking the city, about how Megan had written poetry in college, but life had caught her up in the whirlwind of reality, and now her poetry was just advertising slogans. "You know, Megan," he said, handing her the cup, and their fingers brushed briefly, sending a jolt of electricity through her skin. "You have fire. Not just creativity, but real passion. Most people here are just working for a paycheck, but you're on fire." She waved him off, trying to hide her blush. "Oh, come on, Ethan. It's just caffeine and adrenaline. I have reality waiting for me at home, with school assemblies and microwave dinners." But inside she felt that spark flaring, not strong, not dangerously, but enough to remind her that she was still alive, still capable of emotions that weren't tied to the routine. They walked back into the conference room, but the conversation was still going strong. Ethan was telling a funny story about a disastrous campaign in the past where they were advertising an energy drink, and the slogan "Burst of Energy" had led to the bottles exploding in a warehouse due to a defect, and they were both laughing, hunched over the table, tears in their eyes, and in that moment of intimacy, with their faces closer than they should have been, Megan found herself thinking about how expressive his eyes were, full of stories she wanted to hear. But then she caught herself. It was harmless, just tired flirting, nothing more. She loved Nathan, she loved her life, and the spark would die out the moment she walked out the door. "Okay, time to go home," she said, packing her things, and Ethan nodded. "Yeah, sure. Thanks for the evening, Megan. You made it unforgettable." And as she got into the taxi, looking at the skyscraper receding into the distance, she thought it was just a moment, but deep down she knew that sparks sometimes flare up into flames if they are not extinguished in time. Earlier that day, Megan had arrived at the office 15 minutes late. Jake had forgotten his backpack and had to go back. And on the way she'd gotten stuck in traffic, where cars crawled like snails on the pavement, and she drummed her fingers nervously on the steering wheel, thinking about how Nathan had come in late last night, tired, and they'd barely even talked, just kissed goodnight and fallen asleep back to back. There was a pile of email waiting for her at the office, clients demanding changes, coworkers complaining about delays, and Ethan had stopped as he passed her cubicle. "Megan, are you okay? You seem tense. She'd smiled, waving it off. "It's fine, just family stuff. Can we talk about the project?" And they walked into his office, where the walls were covered with awards for the best campaigns, and on the desk there was a photo of his ex-wife. No, he removed it after the divorce. Now there is only a model of the yacht on which he liked to sail on the lake on weekends. In the office, Ethan sat down across from her, crossed his legs, and began, "This project is our chance to conquer a new segment. Organic cosmetics are trending, but the competition is fierce. Your ideas are fresh, Megan. Tell me what's on your mind." She laid out the sketches, explaining the concept. "We focus on authenticity, not just a product, but a story, a woman who finds harmony in nature. Videos with lavender fields, models without makeup, only our cosmetics emphasize natural beauty." Ethan listened attentively, nodding, and sometimes his gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, but she chalked it up to concentration. "Brilliant," he finally said. "We'll gather the team tonight, finalize it. You're in charge." And there was a confidence in his tone that made her feel valuable, needed, unlike at home, where sometimes she was just a mom solving everyday problems. By evening, the team had assembled. Lisa, designer Mark, copywriter Sarah, and a couple of interns, all buzzing with caffeine and a deadline. They argued for hours. "No, the color is too bright, it'll turn off the audience," Sarah would say, and Mark would counter, "It's organic, it should be alive, like nature." Megan would mediate, offering compromises, and Ethan would watch, occasionally intervening. "Megan's right, let's try pastels." His support was like an anchor in the storm, and when everyone else left, leaving them alone, the conversation flowed naturally, like a river after rain. Over coffee, they talked about life. "Have you ever regretted your career choice?" he asked, and she mused. "Sometimes. The kids grow up so fast, and I miss things. But work gives me freedom." He nodded. "I understand. After the divorce, I realized that work was all I had left. But you, Megan, you have balance. Be jealous." And they laughed at it, at the absurdity of envying someone else's life, and that spark, light but persistent, was woven into that laughter. At home, when she finally returned, Nathan was already asleep, and the children were breathing peacefully in their rooms, and Megan, lying in bed, looked at the ceiling, thinking about that laughter, about that touch, and convincing herself that it didn't mean anything. It was just fatigue playing tricks. A week passed, full of small household chores. Emma caught a cold and was capricious, demanding her mother's attention. Jake brought a note from school about the upcoming football match, which she promised to come to, and Nathan, her reliable Nathan, was as always immersed in his clinic, where patients with their pains and stories took all his strength, leaving in the evening only tired hugs and conversations about the weather or bills, and Megan caught herself sometimes looking at him and thinking, "Where is that guy who once read me poetry under the moon in the park, making my heart flutter with just one look?" But she drove these thoughts away because she loved him, truly, with the kind of love that withstood childbirth, sleepless nights, and financial crises, and believed that sparks are for teenagers, and adults live by stability, like the foundation of a house. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the agency was heating up. A big presentation for a client, the very same organic cosmetics brand that could bring the company millions in contracts, was approaching, and the whole team was on edge, like an orchestra before a premiere, where one wrong chord could ruin the whole show. Megan was in charge of the creative part, and she spent countless hours polishing slides, rehearsing the speech in the bathroom mirror, where her voice echoed confidently, but inside she was nervous, because she knew that not only did this depend on the bonus, but also on her reputation in an industry where women like her have to be twice as good as men to be noticed. Ethan, as always, was at the center of everything, coordinating, motivating, and his presence in the office acted like a magnet, drawing glances and whispers, especially after that night when they had laughed together, and Megan had noticed how he would sometimes linger his gaze on her during meetings, with that little smile that made her heart skip a beat. But she chalked it up to paranoia, repeating to herself, "It's work, nothing more." The day of the presentation arrived sunny and breezy, with that autumnal flavor in the air when leaves swirl through the streets of Chicago like confetti at a parade, and Megan arrived early, dressed in her best outfit, a black pencil skirt, white blouse, and heels that made her look taller and more confident, even though inside she felt like a schoolgirl about to take an exam. The conference room was packed clients in suits, with notepads and skeptical expressions, the agency team in the back, whispering nervously, and Ethan standing by the projector in his perfectly tailored gray suit, with an ocean green tie that brought out his eyes, and when he began to speak, his voice filled the room like a symphony, confident, charismatic, with the kind of intonation that made everyone listen with bated breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, smiling the kind of smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo, "today we are not just introducing a product. We are introducing a story of getting back to our roots, of being in tune with nature, making every woman irresistible not through masks, but through authenticity. And let me introduce the person who brought this vision to life. Megan Carter, our creative genius." When he said her name, their eyes met, and in that moment Megan felt that spark flare up again, brighter, warmer, because there was not just respect in his eyes, but something personal, intimate, as if he was speaking not only for the clients, but for her alone, and she stood up, trying to stop her hands from shaking, and began her part. "Thank you, Ethan. Let's talk about why this campaign is not just advertising, but a movement. Our target audience is women who are tired of artificiality, looking for the real thing. Imagine a video where a model walks through a field of lavender, the wind plays in her hair, and our cosmetics do not change her, but enhance her natural beauty. The slogan "Nature in your skin" is not words, it is a promise. She spoke, gesturing, showing slides of vivid images, green leaves, dewdrops, smiling faces, and she felt the audience come alive, nodding, taking notes. But most of all, she was mesmerized by Ethan, standing to the side, with that confident pose, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes following her every move, as if he were proud of her, as if she were his muse and not just a colleague. The presentation went off with a bang. The clients applauded, asked questions, but with enthusiasm, and when it was all over, the main one of them, a gray-haired man with glasses, shook Ethan's hand. "Impressive. We're in. Let's discuss the details over dinner." Ethan smiled. "Of course. My team deserves a celebration." And just like that, suddenly, the evening turned into a celebration. They went to a lakeside restaurant with windows overlooking the twinkling lights of the city and a menu full of dishes like truffle steaks and exotic fruit salads. And the team sat around a long table, raising glasses to success, laughing at jokes about past failures, and Megan sat next to Ethan because he himself pointed to a place. "Megan, sit here. You're the heroine of the day." His foot accidentally touched her under the table, or was it? She didn't know, but the touch sent a wave of warmth through her body, and she sipped her wine to hide her embarrassment as she listened to him tell a joke about his first presentation, when the projector broke and he improvised with drawings on napkins, and everyone laughed, and she thought, "He's so alive, so full of energy, unlike Nathan, who seems like a squeezed lemon lately." As dinner wore on, the wine flowed, the conversations became more and more intimate. Lisa complaining about her boyfriend, Mark showing off his new tattoo, and Ethan leaning closer to Megan and whispering, "You were amazing tonight. Clients ate out of your hand. None of this would have happened without you." His breath fanned her ear, and she turned, their faces close, too close for their colleagues, and she said, "This is the team. You too. You inspire everyone." He smiled. "And you? Do I inspire you?" The question hung in the air, full of implications, and she laughed nervously. "Sure, like a boss." But inside she knew it was more, and as dinner ended and everyone started to leave, calling for cabs, Ethan offered, "Megan, let me give you a ride. Your house is on the way and it's late." She hesitated. Nathan was home today, but he was probably already asleep, and the taxi would take a long time, so she nodded. "Okay, thank you." His car was luxurious, a black sedan with leather seats that smelled of expensive cologne and success, and as they pulled away from the restaurant, the city lights flashed past the window like stars in slow motion, and the radio played soft jazz, creating an intimate atmosphere that Megan tried to ignore as she chatted about work. "You think the contract will be signed this week?" Ethan nodded, one hand on the wheel. Absolutely. Thank you. You know, Megan, I've noticed for a long time how passionate you are about work. But today, you were incredible today. His words were a compliment, but with a hint of something more, and she turned to him. Ethan, is that the wine talking? He laughed. No, it's true. You deserve more than just routine. And then, at the red light, when the car stopped, he looked at her, and in his eyes there was that charisma that had captivated her all day, the confidence that attracted her like a moth to a flame. And in a moment of weakness, when the wine was spinning her head and her heart was pounding loudly, he leaned down, and their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but then deepened, full of the passion that had been building for weeks, and Megan responded, her arms wrapped around his neck, forgetting for a moment about everything. About Nathan, about the children, about morality. As they pulled away, the traffic light turned green and Ethan stepped on the gas, but the air in the car was heavy with tension, and Megan leaned back in her seat, feeling a rush of guilt like a cold shower after a hot day. Ethan, this was a mistake. I'm married. He looked at her, unperturbed, with a slight smile. Maybe it was a mistake, but it was a nice one, wasn't it? Don't jump to conclusions, Megan. Sometimes life gives you chances you can't miss. His words hinted at serious intentions, at the fact that this was not just a kiss from Ethan, but the beginning of something, and she was silent for the rest of the drive, torn between the excitement that bubbled in her veins like champagne and the guilt that burned her soul, convincing herself. This is a one-time weakness. It will not happen again. I love Nathan. This does not mean anything. But when he pulled up outside her house, kissed her cheek goodbye and said, "Good night, Megan. See you tomorrow." She stepped out, her legs wobbly, and looking at the dark windows where her family slept, she thought she had just crossed a line and there might be no turning back. Megan woke up a little nervous, remembering that spark, but she pushed it away as she made breakfast for the kids, kissed Nathan goodbye, and he said, "Good luck with the presentation, honey. You can do it." And his words were warm but routine, without the spark she'd seen in Ethan. In the office, the team rehearsed, Ethan moving among them, adjusting slides, making jokes to break the tension. "Mark, your design is a masterpiece, but let's add more greenery so the clients feel like they're in the Amazon jungle." And when he approached Megan, nervous, she nodded. A little. He put his hand on her shoulder, a friendly gesture, but the touch lingered. "You're going to be a star. Trust me." The presentation was a high point, with clients asking tough questions. What about the video budget? And Ethan answering confidently, "We'll optimize, but the quality won't suffer." "Megan, tell us about Roy." She jumped into the conversation, numbers and graphs rolling off her tongue, and his approving nod gave her strength. Afterwards, in the restaurant, the atmosphere relaxed toasts, laughter, and Ethan ordered a bottle of champagne. To Megan, our muse. Everyone clinked glasses, and she blushed, feeling his gaze. When everyone left, in the car the conversation turned personal. "Tell me about your family," he said, and she talked about her children, but he interrupted. "What about yourself? What makes Megan happy?" And she fell silent because she didn't know the answer, and then the kiss happened like an explosion, full of emotions that she had been suppressing. She walked quietly into the house. Nathan was asleep, and she lay down next to him, staring into the darkness torn. The excitement of the kiss was dizzying, the guilt was burning, but Ethan's words echoed, opportunities not to be missed, hinting that he wanted more, and she thought, this is a mistake, but why does it feel so right? Megan woke to the sound of her alarm clock, which pierced the silence of the bedroom like a persistent guest who didn't want to leave, and she reached for her phone to turn it off, feeling Nathan stir next to her, muttering something unintelligible about an early surgery, and then falling silent again, his breathing as regular and predictable as the clock on the nightstand that had been ticking for 15 years of their life together, a reminder of how time was slipping through her fingers, leaving behind a routine that had once seemed cozy and now simply stifling. She stood up quietly so as not to wake the children and went into the bathroom, where the mirror reflected her face still attractive, with the slight wrinkles around her eyes from laughter and stress, and thought of that kiss in Ethan's car a week ago, how his lips had been hard and sure, unlike Nathan's soft, familiar kisses, and the thought flared up inside her like a forbidden fire that she tried to stamp out, repeating to herself that it had been a mistake, just a moment of weakness after wine and the adrenaline of success. But inside, in that part of her soul where true desires were hidden, she knew that this was the beginning of something more, something that was both alluring and frightening. Nathan stood up after her, kissed her cheek absently, muttering about a patient with complications from surgery, and went to take a shower, leaving her to make breakfast oatmeal for the kids, coffee for herself, and she watched Emma and Jake sleepily chewing, chatting about school, about how Emma wanted to sign up for a dance and Jake dreamed of a new football uniform, and Megan nodded, smiling, but her mind was already in the office, where Ethan was waiting with his smile that could light up the entire floor, and she dressed carefully, choosing a low-cut blouse that she usually didn't wear to work, justifying it by saying that today was an important meeting, although in reality she wanted to feel desired, not just a mother or a wife, but a woman full of life and secrets. The day at the agency had started off in a flurry. Emails were flying like autumn leaves. Colleagues were discussing a new project for a car brand that required creative ideas about freedom and speed, and Megan sat at her desk, trying to concentrate on her drafts, but her gaze kept sliding to Ethan's office, where he was standing by the window, talking on the phone, his silhouette sharp against the light, and when he noticed her, he waved his hand, inviting her in, and she went, feeling her heart speed up, as if she were going not to a business meeting, but to a date. "Good morning, Megan," he said, closing the door behind her, and there was a warmth in his voice that made the air vibrate. "How was your weekend? Are the kids too tired?" She sat in the chair opposite, crossing her legs, and replied, "Fine, Nathan was at a conference, so I managed alone, but that's usual. And you? Golf or a yacht?" He laughed, coming closer and sitting on the edge of the table, so close that she could smell his cologne, woody and citrusy, and said, "Neither. I was thinking about you, to be honest. About that night after the presentation. I hope you don't regret it." His words hung in the air, full of innuendo, and Megan felt her cheeks flush, but she tried to remain calm. "Ethan, it was. Impulsive. I'm married, I have a family." He nodded, but his eyes were challenging. "I understand. But life is short, Megan. Sometimes you have to let yourself feel. By the way, I have something for you." And he pulled a small box tied with a ribbon from a drawer and handed it to her. "Open it. This is not just a gift, it's a token of appreciation for your work." She opened it, and inside were earrings, gold ones with little diamonds that sparkled like the stars in the Chicago night sky, and Megan gasped, "Ethan, these are too much. I can't take them." But he smiled, "You can. They'll remind you of your brilliance. Wear them to lunch tonight. I've got a reservation at Le Petit Paris, just for us, to discuss a new project." She wanted to refuse, to say that this was overstepping the mark, but his look, full of confidence and desire, broke her resistance, and she nodded, "Okay, but just lunch. Nothing else." She worked absently for the rest of the morning, answering phones, proofreading slogans, but her thoughts were swirling around those earrings she'd hidden in her bag, and around Nathan, who'd called during his break. "Honey, I'm going to be late today, an urgent consultation. Kiss the kids for me." His voice was tired, distant, and Megan felt a twinge of irritation. He was always busy, his patients always came first, and the excuse popped into her head like a life preserver. "Maybe I deserve a little attention, since he won't give it to me." When it was time for lunch, Ethan was waiting by the elevator, and they went down together, his hand lightly touching her back, guiding her, and the touch was light but electrifying, making her skin prickle. The restaurant was cozy, with white tablecloths and a view of the river, where boats glided across the water like memories of summer, and they sat at a table in the corner where no one could overhear, and Ethan ordered wine red, velvety, and salads with goat cheese, and then steaks, as rare as their meetings, and the conversation flowed easily. "Tell me more about yourself, Megan. What do you like, besides work and family?" She sipped her wine, feeling it warm her veins. "I like reading adventure novels where the heroines find themselves in unexpected places, and walking in the park, looking at the lake. What about you? What makes Ethan Caldwell happy?" He leaned closer, his fingers brushing her hand on the table. Now, being here with you, you're special, Megan. There's a fire in you that Nathan probably doesn't see. The mention of her husband stung, but she didn't pull away. Nathan's a good man. It's just, his work is all-consuming. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. I know, but you deserve better. Let me show you. The lunch stretched into 2 hours of laughter and flirtation. He talked about his travels in Europe, about the vineyards in France where the wine flowed like water, and suggested, would you like to go together sometime, just as friends? She shook her head, but inside she was melting, and when they returned to the office, he walked her to her desk, his fingers sliding over her shoulder. Wear the earrings tomorrow. They'll bring out your eyes. At home that evening, everything was the same. The kids were noisy, demanding help with their homework. Nathan came home late, ate a cold dinner, and sat at the computer, checking medical papers, and Megan, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea, looked at him and saw the cracks. How he rarely asked about her day, how their conversations boiled down to logistics, who would pick up the kids, who would pay the bills, and she thought, he loves me, but he doesn't see me fading away in this routine. At night, lying awake, she remembered Ethan's touch, his gift, and justified herself. It's not cheating, just attention that I'm missing. Nathan is too busy saving other people's lives to notice mine. The next day at the office, Ethan continued the offensive. He sent flowers to her desk, a bouquet of roses as red as passion, with a note, for the brightest star of the team, and her colleagues whispered, but she smiled. Just for the project, even though she knew the truth. During the meeting, he sat next to her, his knee brushing hers under the table, and it was deliberate, light but insistent, making her focus not on the charts, but on him, on his profile, on the way he confidently led the discussion, interrupting Mark. No, Megan's idea is better. Let's develop her concept of speed as freedom. Afterwards, he invited her to a private dinner again, in a small Italian restaurant where the pasta was homemade and the wine was old, and there he gave her a bracelet, silver, engraved, for your fire, and said, wear it, Megan, it will remind you of us. She wore it, secretly, taking it off at home so Nathan wouldn't ask, and family life seemed increasingly bleak. Nathan canceled a weekend dinner because he was called to the clinic, leaving her with the kids to watch cartoons, and she was quietly angry, thinking, he didn't even apologize properly, just sorry, honey, patients don't wait. Ethan called in the evenings under the pretext of work. Megan, I need your idea for a slogan. But the conversation turned to the personal. What are you doing now? Imagine if we were together on the lake on my yacht. She answered in a whisper so the kids wouldn't hear. Ethan, it's dangerous. But she didn't hang up, feeling the excitement of his voice, of his attention, which poured down like rain after a drought. At work, the touching became more frequent, a hand on her waist in the hallway, fingers intertwining briefly in a conference room, and she would maintain the facade. We're a team, nothing more. But inside she would rationalize. Nathan doesn't notice me. His practice is his mistress, so why can't I have a little light? The gifts continued: a cashmere scarf, tickets to a concert she'd mentioned in passing, and each time he'd say, this is for you because you deserve it. Another week of these temptations passed, and Megan felt the affair gathering momentum, like a train rushing down the tracks without brakes, and the cracks in her home were widening. Nathan forgot about Emma's school play, coming in late to apologize, and she cried out quietly, you always do this. Your work is more important than us. He hugged her. I'm sorry, I'll try. But the next day he left early again, and she thought, Ethan won't forget. He really sees me. At the office, Ethan invited her to a late dinner after work. Just us, to celebrate the contract, and they went to a rooftop bar where the city lay below like a carpet of lights, and he clinked his glasses. To us, Megan, to what could be. She drank, feeling the wine blur the boundaries, and his hand fell on her thigh under the table, and she did not remove it, justifying, it's just a touch. Nathan does not even know how to touch me for real. The night ended with a kiss in the elevator, passionate, full of promises, and she went home torn, but not so much, because temptation had become a part of her, like breathing, and the justifications sounded louder. I'm not bad, I'm just looking for something that is not at home. But the temptation didn't stop there. Ethan would text her at night, thinking of you, with a photo of the sunset over the lake, and she'd text back, feeling guilty but also excited. And at work, he'd host a private dinner in his office, with sushi delivered and champagne where they'd sit close, his lips against her ear. You drive me crazy, Megan. When are you going to say yes? She'd whisper, not now. But her body wouldn't respond, and at home Nathan would notice her distraction. What's wrong? You seem distant. She'd lie, work, stress, and he'd nod, turning back to his papers, and a crack had opened in her mind. He doesn't fight for me like Ethan does. The gifts piled up the perfume he'd chosen himself, saying, "It smells like you, passion and mystery," and she'd worn it, feeling alive, justifying, "It's not a betrayal, just the care Nathan doesn't give because he's always busy." Roman was spinning her head like a whirlwind, and Megan was masking herself at work with smiles and refusals, but inside she was giving in, step by step, seeing Ethan as salvation from the routine that was suffocating her marriage. Seemed so right. Megan woke to the sharp sound of her alarm, cutting through the morning silence like a knife, and she reached for her phone to turn it off, feeling Nathan stir beside her, muttering something about a complicated surgery planned for the morning before falling back asleep, his breathing even almost mechanical, like the ticking of the clock on the nightstand that counted down the years of their marriage, 15 years full of love, but increasingly dissolving into routine that settled like dust on their relationship, making it dull. She stood up, trying not to make any noise so as not to wake the children, and went into the bathroom, where the mirror showed her face, still beautiful, with fine lines around her eyes that showed weariness and age. But there was a genuine vivacity in her gaze, fueled by the memory of her kiss with Ethan, of his hands, of his words that life was not only duties but also desires, and the thought, like forbidden fruit, beckoned to her, making her heart beat faster, although she told herself that it was a mistake, a momentary weakness caused by wine and success, and not something that could destroy her family. Nathan rose after her, his face drawn from the night's watch, and he kissed her cheek, but the gesture was as familiar as morning coffee, and Megan responded with a weak smile, holding out her mug to him. "You were late last night," he said, looking at her over his mug with the same intensity he had when he was diagnosing patients. "Another project." There was no accusation in his voice, but there was a wariness, as if he had noticed something she didn't want to show. "Yeah, a new client," she said, looking away and smoothing Emma's hair, who was already seated at the table. "We need to get everything perfect." Nathan nodded, but his eyes lingered on her, and Megan felt a pang of guilt, but she brushed it aside, thinking he was just tired, like her, and unsuspecting. She drove to the office, leaving Nathan with the kids getting ready for school, and on the way she turned on the radio, where the soft jazz reminded her of that night in Ethan's car, the promise in his eyes, and she found herself smiling even as she quickly told herself that this was dangerous, that she should stop. At Caldwell and Partners, the day had begun with the usual bustle. A new client, an electric car maker, wanted a campaign that wouldn't just sell cars, but create a dream of freedom, and the team had gathered in a conference room where sketches covered the walls and printouts and coffee cups littered the table. Megan sat at the head, her laptop open to a draft of a presentation, but her thoughts were distracted when Ethan walked in, his dark blue suit oozing confidence, his smile directed only at her, making her heart skip a beat. "Good morning, team," he began, his voice a confident chord that set the tone for the day. "This project is our chance to take things to the next level. The client wants a story that inspires. Megan, tell us about your concept." She stood up, trying to focus, and spoke. "We positioned the electric car as a symbol of the freedom of the future. Video, a woman behind the wheel, a mountain road, a sunset, wind in her hair. The tagline is freedom on your terms. Emotions, not numbers." Lisa took notes. Mark suggested adding neon accents to the visuals, but Ethan looked only at Megan, his eyes shining with approval, and when she finished, he said, "Perfect. But the client wants boldness, even if it means pushing the envelope. Megan, do you know what I mean?" His tone was light, but there was a hint in it that she caught, but did not want to elaborate. After the meeting, he asked her to stay. "Let's go to my office. We'll discuss the details." She nodded, feeling her pulse quicken, and followed him, although she knew this was about more than just work. In his office, where the windows looked out onto the glittering Chicago skyline, Ethan closed the door and the air grew thicker, as if they were in another world where office rules didn't apply. "You were great," he said, sitting on the edge of his desk, his gaze sliding over her, lingering on the earrings she was wearing, the same diamond ones he'd given her. "But this client, they want us to show their cars as market leaders, even if the data is, well, a little embellished." Megan frowned, her fingers tightening on her pen. "Ethan, that's not fair. We can't fake the numbers." He smiled, raising his hands in surrender. "Not fake, embellish. It's a game, Megan. Everyone does it. You don't want us to lose, do you?" His voice was soft, convincing, and he stepped closer, his hand touching her shoulder, and the touch was like a spark, igniting something inside. "Trust me. We'll do this carefully, and you'll be a star." She wanted to protest, but his closeness, his confidence, broke her, and she nodded. "Okay, but I want to see the reports." His smile widened. "I knew you'd be with me." That evening, Nathan was waiting for her at home, which was unusual. He was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, his gaze not as absent-minded as usual, but tenacious, studying. "You're late again," he said, and there was a shadow of suspicion in his voice. "What kind of project is this that you're coming home at midnight?" Megan took off her coat, trying to look calm. "Big client, Nathan. We need everything to be perfect." She went into the kitchen, pouring herself some water so as not to meet his eyes, but he followed her. "You've changed, Megan. You seem somehow distant. What's going on?" His words were like a jab, and she turned around, forcing a smile. "It's just work. You know how it is." But he did not back down. "You used to tell me about your days, but now nothing. I'm worried." Guilt tightened in her throat, but she waved it off. "I'm tired, let's not now," and went into the bedroom, leaving him standing with a glass, and his silence was heavier than any questions. The next day, Ethan continued to draw her into his world, sending a text in the morning. "Lunch at the signature room, 95th floor, just us. We need to discuss strategy." She knew it was more than work, but she went, wearing the earrings he had given her, and in the restaurant, where the windows looked out over the city below like a map of her life, he ordered champagne and raised his glass. "To you, Megan, to your fire." They talked about the project, but his hand came over hers under the table, his fingers intertwined with hers, and he said, "The client wants a report showing their cars are already leading. Finance will prepare numbers that will satisfy us. Are you with me?" She wanted to say no, but his look, his warmth, made her weak, and she nodded. "I want to see those numbers." He smiled. "My girl." The "my" resonated in her like a promise she had feared but wanted. At home, Nathan became more attentive. He noticed the earrings when she forgot to take them off and asked, "New. Where are they from?" She lied, "A gift from the team for the project." But his gaze narrowed. "Expensive. Beautiful." She changed the subject, but he kept asking questions about why she checked her phone so often, why she was late, and Megan answered evasively, citing deadlines, but she felt his suspicions growing, like a shadow falling on their marriage. Nathan began to stay late at home, trying to connect. He cooked dinner, suggested watching an old movie they'd loved when they were younger, but Megan was distracted, her thoughts returning to Ethan, to his gifts, the pendant he'd given her at another dinner, whispering, "Wear it close to your heart," which she wore, hidden under her blouse, and every time Nathan hugged her, she felt the metal cool on her skin, reminding her of her secret. The electric car project was moving forward, and Ethan had put her in charge of negotiating with a client, knowing that her charisma would close the deal, but also making it clear that the sales report would be fixed. Megan felt uneasy, her principals screaming that this was wrong, but she went along with it, thinking that Ethan knew how to survive in this world, and she was just following his lead. At one meeting, he pulled her aside. "Megan, we're on the verge of something big, not just for the company, but for us." His hand slid around her waist, and she didn't pull away. even though she knew she should. "Ethan, I can't," she said, but her voice was shaking, and he smiled. "You can. You already do." And he was right. She was falling into his world, where the lines of ethics were blurred, and his touch, his words, drew her in like a whirlpool. At home, Nathan became more insistent one evening. When the children were sleeping, he sat next to her. "Megan, talk to me. I can see that something is wrong. You check your phone like you're waiting for a call. You come home late, and I don't know what to think." His voice was full of pain, and she wanted to tell him everything, but instead she hugged him. "It's just work, Nathan. I'm tired, but it's okay." He didn't believe her. She saw it in his eyes, and when he went to bed, she sat there, looking at the text from Ethan. "Tomorrow night, my yacht, just us. Say yes." She didn't answer, but she didn't delete the message either, and the shadow of Nathan's suspicion, mixed with her guilt and temptation, grew thicker, like a fog in which the shore is lost. Mornings at the Carter house began with a familiar rhythm, but to Megan, every sound, the clink of dishes, the children's laughter, Nathan's footsteps on the wooden floor, was like a taut string, ready to snap at the slightest touch. She stood at the stove, making toast for Emma and Jake, while the twins chatted about school, their voices weaving into the morning hubbub. But her mind was far away in Ethan's office, where last night, after another late meeting, his hands had slid around her waist, his lips finding hers in the dim light of the office, that kiss, full of forbidden passion, still burning on her skin like a burn she could neither extinguish nor ignore. She tried to focus on the children, on their stories of school friends and lessons, but her fingers shook as she spread jam on her bread, and she found herself checking her phone, waiting for a text from Ethan, even though she knew it was dangerous, that every word, every look from him was dragging her deeper into the abyss of no return. Nathan walked into the kitchen, already in his scrubs, his face tired but his eyes alert, as if he were searching for something in her he hadn't seen before. "Good morning," he said, kissing her temple, but his voice was reserved, and Megan gave him a weak smile as she handed him his coffee. "Are you leaving early today?" She nodded, avoiding his gaze. "Yeah, important meeting with a client. New project." He looked at her longer than usual and said, "You've been working hard lately. I hope they appreciate it." There was a hint of sarcasm in his tone, and Megan felt her heart clench, but she just shrugged. "It's my job, Nathan." She turned on the radio on the way to the office, but even the soft jazz couldn't drown out her thoughts of Ethan, of how their romance, which had begun as a spark, had now flared into a fire she couldn't control. Last night in his office hadn't been the first over the past 2 weeks. Their stolen moments had become regular. Quick kisses in the elevator as the doors closed, his hand lingering on her back in the hallway, and finally a secret meeting at a hotel last week, where they'd escaped under the pretext of discussing strategy. The suite had been luxurious, overlooking Lake Michigan, and there, amid the silk sheets and the dim light, Megan had allowed herself to forget about Nathan, about the children, about morality, giving in to a passion that was like a storm sweeping away everything in its path. But then, in the taxi on the way home, the guilt washed over her like a cold wave, and she stared at her reflection in the window, asking herself how she had gotten to this point, how the woman who had once vowed fidelity at the altar was now lying to her husband and hiding traces of someone else's cologne on her skin. At the office, Ethan was waiting for her, as always, in his office, his smile warm but possessive in a way that was both intimidating and inviting. "Good morning, my star," he said as he closed the door behind her, his voice low and intimate, as if they were in that hotel instead of the office. "Are you ready for today? The client wants the final report on electric vehicles." Megan nodded, but her mind wasn't on work. She was thinking about the way he'd whispered her name in the dark, his fingers entwined with hers, and the memory made her cheeks heat up. "Yes, I'm ready," she said, trying to sound professional. "But Ethan, we have to be careful. People are starting to notice." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her wrist, and he smiled. "Let them notice. I don't want to hide, Megan. You're too important to me." His words were like sweet poison, and she didn't pull away, though she knew she should. Instead, she said, "We're at work. Let's focus." But her voice was shaking, and he noticed his smile widening, like a predator who knows his prey is already trapped. It had been a busy day, with the team finalizing a presentation for the client and Megan leading the negotiations, her voice confident but her integrity crumbling under Ethan's insistence on including creative sales figures that she had seen and knew were false, but had kept quiet because his approval, his look, his touch had become more important to her than the truth. After the meeting, he invited her into his office, ostensibly to discuss edits, but as soon as the door closed, he pulled her close and their lips met, hungrily, desperately, as if they were trying to quench a thirst that was only growing. "Ethan, not here," she whispered, but her arms were already around his neck, and they froze when Lisa knocked on the door. "Megan, the client wants to clarify the numbers." She pulled away, adjusting her blouse, and walked out, feeling her heart pounding and guilt mixing with excitement like a head-spinning cocktail. That evening she was supposed to be at Emma's school play. Her daughter was playing the fairy godmother in Cinderella and Megan had promised to be there, but Ethan had texted, "Urgent client meeting at the hotel. You're the only one who can close the deal." She knew it was a lie, that he wanted her, but she went anyway, telling Nathan she'd be late at work. At the hotel, in the same room overlooking the lake, they lost themselves in each other again, and every kiss, every touch was a step further into the web she'd spun. When she got home, it was past midnight, and Nathan was waiting for her in the living room, his face tense, his eyes cold. "You missed Emma's play," he said, his voice quiet but heavy as lead. "She was waiting for you, Megan. What kind of work is so important that you forget about your daughter?" Megan felt her throat tighten and muttered, "Client, urgent meeting." I couldn't refuse. But Nathan stepped toward her, holding her phone, which she had left on the table. "I saw the message. From your boss. Waiting for you, my star. Does this work?" Her heart sank, and she grabbed her phone, trying to remain calm. "Nathan, it's just a joke. This is how Ethan communicates. He values my work." But her voice was shaking, and she could see his eyes darkening with pain and suspicion. "A joke? You come home late, you don't talk about your day, you miss your daughter's play, and I find texts from your boss that don't sound like work. Megan, what's going on?" His voice grew louder, and she felt a web of lies tighten around her, but instead of the truth, she chose another lie. "It's work, Nathan. You know how it is in my industry. Constant deadlines, meetings." He looked at her as if trying to find in her face the woman he once loved and said, "I want to believe you, Megan, but I don't know if I can." He went into the bedroom, leaving her in the living room, and she sat on the couch, looking at her phone, where there was a new message from Ethan. Today was magical. Again tomorrow? She didn't answer, but her fingers were shaking, and guilt was eating away at her insides like acid, because she knew her lies were getting thicker, and Nathan was getting closer to the truth. The next day at the office, Ethan was as normal as ever, joking with the team, praising their work. But there was something new in his eyes, something possessive, as if he knew she couldn't say no anymore. He suggested meeting again after work, at a different hotel, and Megan, despite her guilt, agreed because his world, the world of passion, attention, adrenaline had become her refuge from the grayness of home, where Nathan now looked at her with suspicion, and the children, not understanding why their mother was missing their events, were beginning to distance themselves. That evening, in the new room, where the curtains were drawn and the light fell softly on the bed, Ethan whispered, "You're mine, Megan. Forget about him. He doesn't see you like I do." And she drowned in his words, in his hands, but every time she returned home, she felt how the web of lies became denser, and Nathan, with his questions, with his pain, was closer to tearing it apart. At home, Nathan kept watching. He noticed the way she hid her phone, the way she avoided his gaze, and one night when she went to shower, he took her phone, entered the password, the kids' birthdays, which she hadn't changed in years, and found another text from Ethan. "I need you, Megan. Don't keep me waiting." When she returned, he was waiting for her in the bedroom, his face pale, his voice icy. "Who is Ethan, Megan? And why is he texting you like a lover?" She froze, her heart pounding, and she lied again. "It's just the boss, Nathan. That's the way he communicates, that's his style. It's all about work." But her voice was shaking, and Nathan stepped closer. I'm not an idiot, Megan. You're lying to me. I can see it in your eyes. She wanted to tell him everything, but the fear that the truth would destroy everything her family, her children, her life made her say, "You're wrong. I'm just tired." He looked at her, and his silence was louder than a scream, and when he went to sleep on the couch, she was alone, feeling the web of lies tightening around her, and the message from Ethan that she hadn't deleted burned on the screen like an accusation she couldn't refute. The morning was quiet in the Carter house, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was tense, like the air before a storm, when every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the clink of a spoon against a bowl, the rustle of a newspaper in Nathan's hands seemed like a harbinger of the storm. Megan stood at the stove, making omelets for Emma and Jake, but her movements were automatic, like a robot programmed to do a routine, and her thoughts were racing back to the night before, when Nathan had looked at her with pain and suspicion, holding her phone with a text from Ethan, and her lie that it was just work hung between them like smoke that couldn't be cleared. She tried to focus on the kids, on their chatter about school projects and soccer practice, but her fingers were clenching her spatula too tightly, and she could feel her phone vibrating in her pocket with a new message, and she knew it was Ethan, whose presence in her life had been both a blessing and a curse. Nathan was sitting at his desk, leafing through a medical journal, but his eyes kept sliding toward her, and there was something new in his silence, not just tiredness, but coldness, as if he were building a wall between them, brick by brick. "Are you late again today?" he asked, without looking up from the journal, his voice smooth but sharp as a scalpel. Megan answered, trying to sound casual. "Probably. A new project, an important client." He nodded, but his lips were pressed into a thin line, and she felt her heart tighten with guilt. But she pushed it down, reminding herself that Nathan didn't understand her, didn't see her the way Ethan did, whose words and touches lit a fire in her she hadn't felt in years. She drove to the office, and on the way, looking out over the gray streets of Chicago, where the morning light reflected in puddles from the night's rain, she turned on the radio. But even melancholy jazz couldn't drown out her thoughts of Ethan, of his office where their stolen moments grew bolder, of the hotel room where the silk sheets held their secret, and of how her life, once orderly, was now cracking at the seams like old fabric. At Caldwell and Partners, the day had begun with the usual bustle. The team was preparing for a final presentation to an automaker, and Megan was at her desk checking slides, but her mind was scattered, and when Ethan walked into the conference room, his presence filled the space as always, his charcoal suit emphasizing his confidence, and the smile he gave her was full of promises she dreaded but wanted to hear. "Good morning, team," he began, his voice like a confident conductor leading an orchestra to a climax. "Today is a defining day. This contract could change our future. Megan, are you ready?" She nodded, feeling his gaze linger on her, and began her part of the presentation, her voice firm, but inside she was fighting the feeling that everything she was doing was part of a game that Ethan was drawing her deeper into. After the presentation, as the team dispersed, Ethan asked her to come into his office, and she did, knowing this was about more than just work. The door closed behind her, and he sat on the edge of his desk, his eyes shining, but there was something new in them, not just passion, but calculation. "Megan, I have news for you," he said, his voice soft but with a hint of urgency. "A new client, a multimillion-dollar campaign. This isn't just a contract, it's our chance to go global, and I want you to lead it." She frowned, sensing a catch. "Who is this client, and why me?" He smiled, but his smile wasn't as warm as it had been before. "They're a multinational company. They want aggressive advertising for a new product. But there's a catch: the funding is coming through an offshore account. Nothing illegal, just not entirely transparent." Megan felt her stomach clench. "Ethan, that sounds risky. What if we get tested?" He stepped closer, his hand touching her shoulder, and his voice became persuasive. "There won't be any tests. I've got it all figured out. And you'll get a promotion, chief strategy officer, your own office, a salary that will provide for your children for years to come. Think about the future, Megan." His words were like seduction, another thread in the web he was spinning around her, and she wanted to say no, but his closeness, his confidence, his promise of the stability that had been missing from her life with Nathan broke her. "Okay," she said quietly, "but I want to know all the details." His smile widened. "I knew you were my star." That evening, Ethan invited her to dinner, ostensibly to discuss the project, but dinner at a lakeside restaurant, candles reflected in wine glasses, quickly turned into another clandestine meeting full of looks and touches. "You're making the right choice, Megan," he said, squeezing her hand under the table. "This isn't just about work. This is about us, about what we can build together." She wanted to protest, to remind him of her family, but his words, his warmth, were like a drug, and she remained silent, letting him lead her to a hotel room where they were lost in each other again, each kissing a signature on a deal she didn't fully understand. But when she got home, the guilt washed over her with renewed vigor, especially when she saw Emma's drawing on the kitchen table, a fairy from the play she'd missed, with the words, "For Mom." Megan clutched the drawing, her eyes filling with tears, but she hid them as Nathan walked in, his face cold as the winter wind. "You're late again," he said, and his voice wasn't just tired, it was icy, as if he hadn't expected the truth from her. "Where have you been?" Megan took off her coat, trying to look calm. "Work, Nathan. New project, I told you." But he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I called your office. Lisa said you left at 6. Her heart sank, and she felt the web of lies crack under his gaze. "I was with a client," she lied, her voice shaking. "Meeting at a restaurant." He looked at her as if trying to cut the truth out of her words. "You've never mentioned restaurants before. And your phone number, I've seen you hide it. What are you hiding, Megan?" She wanted to tell him everything, but the fear that the truth would destroy their family made her say, "Nothing, Nathan. You think too much." He nodded, but his eyes were hard, and he said, "I'm starting to follow you, Megan. Not because I want to, but because you leave me no choice." He went into the bedroom, leaving her in the living room, and she felt her world crumbling, each lie adding another knot to the web she didn't know how to escape. The next day at the office, Ethan was energetic, showing her the documents for the new project, the million-dollar budgets, the offshore accounts, the complex financing schemes that he called creative, but Megan could see were teetering on the edge of the law. "Ethan, this is dangerous," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "If this gets found out, we could all get hurt." He smiled, his hand on hers. "It won't. I'm in control. And you'll get everything you've ever wanted. The promotion, the respect, the freedom." His words were like a promise of heaven, but she could feel her conscience screaming at her that this was a trap, that the legal risks were real. But his look, his confidence, made her nod. "I'm in." She hadn't realized how deep she was going, how the deal with Ethan was becoming not just professional but personal, tying them together even more tightly. At home, Nathan became even colder. He didn't ask anymore, but she noticed him checking her bag, watching her when she left and came back, and one evening when she came home from the office, he was waiting for her with her phone in his hand. "You left it in the kitchen." Another text from Ethan. "I need you," Star explained, Megan. Her heart was pounding, and she lied again. "It's about the project, Nathan. That's how he communicates. It's not what you think." But his eyes were full of pain. "I don't know what to think, Megan, but I'll find out the truth." He left, and she was left alone, looking at her phone, where there was a new text from Ethan. "Tomorrow on my yacht. We'll discuss the deal, and more." She didn't answer, but her fingers were shaking, and she knew that the web of lies she was caught in was getting tighter, and Nathan, with his coldness and suspicion, was already holding the scissors to cut it. The morning at the Carter house was deceptively calm, but to Megan, every sound, the clatter of a fork on a plate, the creak of a chair as Emma fidgeted, or the hard look in Nathan's eyes as he sipped his coffee was like ice cracking underfoot, foreshadowing impending failure. She made breakfast, cutting fruit for the children, but her movements were jerky, her thoughts racing between the office, where Ethan waited for her with new promises, and the house, where Nathan was growing colder, his silence a wall she couldn't break through. He'd slept on the couch the night before, and his words, "I'll find out the truth," Megan, still echoed in her head. an accusation she couldn't escape. She tried to focus on the kids, on their conversations about school projects and Jake's upcoming soccer game, but her fingers shook as she poured the juice, and she found herself furtively checking her phone, waiting for a text from Ethan, even though every word he said was another knot in the web she'd spun. Nathan, sitting at the table, looked at her over the top of his mug, his eyes tired but with a new hardness, like a man who's made a decision. "Are you staying late again today?" he asked, his voice even but cold as a winter wind off Lake Michigan. Megan nodded, avoiding his gaze. "Yeah, the project is in the works. Can't afford to slack off." He didn't answer, just nodded, but his silence was louder than words, and she felt guilt tightening in her throat. But she immediately suppressed the feeling, reminding herself that Ethan saw her as a woman, not just a mother and a wife, and this attention, like a drug, drowned out her conscience. On the way to the office, she looked out over the gray Chicago streets, where the morning fog clung to the skyscrapers, and tried to convince herself that she had it all under control, that she could balance her family, her work, and Ethan. But inside, she felt like she was losing her balance, like a tightrope walker walking over a precipice. At Caldwell and Partners, the day had begun with a tense bustle. The team was preparing the final materials for a multimillion-dollar campaign involving an offshore account, and Megan was at her desk, reviewing reports that Ethan called creative, but that she knew were false. Her conscience screamed that this was wrong, that the legal risks were real, but every time she tried to talk to Ethan about it, his charisma, his confidence, his touch silenced her. He walked into the conference room, his navy suit commanding his presence, and the smile he directed at her was a beacon of salvation. But with each passing day, Megan found that there was something calculating in that smile, as if he were playing chess and she was a piece on his board. "Megan, are you ready for today's meeting?" he asked, his voice warm but with a hint of pressure. "The client is waiting for you to dazzle them." She nodded, but her thoughts were scattered, and as she began her presentation, her voice was confident, but inside she felt her mask of professionalism cracking under the onslaught of doubt. After the meeting, Ethan asked her to come into his office, and she did, knowing it was about more than just work. The door closed, and he sat on the edge of his desk, his gaze sliding over her, lingering on the pendant he'd given her, the one she wore under her blouse like a secret token of their connection. "Megan, you're doing great," he said, his voice soft but insistent. "This campaign is your ticket to the top. A director of strategy, your own office, a salary that will change your life. But I need you to be with me completely." He stepped closer, his hand brushing her wrist, and she felt her pulse quicken. But this time there was something in his words that made her wary. "Ethan, I agreed to the project, but these offshore accounts, I'm not sure it's safe," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He smiled, but his smile was not as warm as before. "Megan, you think too much. I am in control. Trust me, and we will both win." His words were a promise, but they were also manipulative, and for the first time, Megan wondered if he was using her, if his charisma was a mask for selfish motives. She was sitting in the cafeteria on her lunch break with Sarah, a coworker who had been at the agency longer than she had and was always forthright. Sarah noticed her distraction, the way she fiddled with her necklace, the way her eyes wandered, and said, "Megan, are you okay? You seem kind of out of place." Megan forced a smile. "Just stress, new project." But Sarah frowned, pushing away her coffee. "This is about Ethan, right? I see the way he looks at you, the way you linger in his office. Be careful, Megan. He has a reputation for using people, especially women, to get his way, then discarding them when they're no longer useful." Her words were like a cold shower, and Megan felt her heart tighten. "You're wrong, Sarah. It's just work." But Sarah shook her head. "I've seen it before. He knows how to manipulate, how to make you feel special. But it's a game, Megan. Don't let him suck you in." She walked away, leaving Megan with her coffee and the doubts that were beginning to eat away at her confidence in Ethan like rust on metal. That evening, Ethan suggested meeting at a hotel, and Megan, despite Sarah's words, went, because his world, the world of passion, attention, promises, was the only place where she felt alive. In the room, where the light was soft and the sheets smelled of lavender, he pulled her close, whispering, "You're mine, Megan. Together, we will change everything." But his words, which had once lit a fire in her, now sounded like a violin playing a false note, and she pulled away. "Ethan, I need time. This is too fast." He frowned, but quickly smiled. "Of course, my star. But don't forget that this deal is our chance." She nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, and when she returned home, guilt washed over her like a wave, especially when she saw Jake waiting for her with a question. "Mom, will you come to my game on Saturday?" she promised, but she knew Ethan had already scheduled a meeting with a client, and her heart was torn between duty and temptation. At home, Nathan was colder than ever. He didn't ask questions anymore, but his behavior had changed. He checked her bag when he thought she wasn't looking, wrote down her departures and returns, and one night when she came home late, he was waiting for her in the living room, his face pale, his voice icy. "I hired a detective, Megan. I didn't want to, but you left me no choice. You're lying to me, and I'm going to find out why." Megan froze, her heart pounding like a trapped bird. "Nathan, this is crazy. I'm just working." But he stepped closer, his eyes full of pain. "You miss Jake's games, Emma's plays, you hide your phone, you come home late smelling like someone else's cologne. Don't lie to me, Megan." She wanted to tell her everything, but the fear that the truth would destroy their family made her say, "You're wrong. This is all work." He looked at her, and his silence was like a sentence, and when he went to sleep on the sofa, she was left alone, feeling how the cracks in her mask were growing wider, and the web of lies in which she was caught was squeezing her ever tighter. Circumstances. The next day at the office, Ethan was more insistent than usual. He showed her more documents from the campaign complex, transfer patterns through offshore accounts, company names she didn't recognize, amounts that made her heart clench. "Ethan, this is too risky," she said, her voice shaking. "If this gets discovered, we could all lose everything." He smiled, his hand on hers. "It won't. I'm in control. And you'll be a legend. Think of the kids, their future." His words were a hook he was pulling at her, and she nodded, even though her conscience was screaming at her that this was a mistake, that she didn't know what she was getting into. Sarah, noticing her paleness, pulled her aside. "Megan, I'm serious. Ethan isn't who he says he is. I overheard him talking to the CFO about some accounts. This isn't just advertising. Be careful." Megan wanted to brush it off, but Sarah's words were like seeds rooted in her doubts, and she began to see Ethan differently. His charisma, which had once been mesmerizing, now seemed like a mask behind which something dark hid. At home, Nathan continued to stalk her. She noticed him checking out her car, writing down the numbers of the cab she called, his coldness like a blade slowly cutting through their marriage. One night, when she returned from the office, he was waiting for her with a photograph. She had never seen her and Ethan walking out of a hotel, their hands intertwined. "It's from the detective," he said, his voice quiet but full of pain. "Explain, Megan." She froze, her lie crumbling like a house of cards, and she said, "It's not what you think, Nathan. We were discussing a project," but her voice was shaking, and he shook his head. "I gave you a chance to tell the truth. Now I know you're lying." He left, and Megan was left alone, staring at the photograph, feeling the cracks in her mask become chasms, Ethan and his deal and his world pulling her deeper into an abyss from which she didn't know how to escape. Mornings at the Caldwell and Partners office began with the usual hum of phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and coworkers bantering over coffee machines. But for Megan, the day was a quiet explosion as she walked into the conference room and saw the team's faces pale and tense, and Ethan standing by the window, his back straight but his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he already knew the storm was about to break over their heads, and his charisma, which had once lit up the entire room, now seemed as dim as a light bulb about to burn out. She sat down at her desk, her hands shaking slightly as she opened her laptop, trying to focus on the final edits to a presentation for that same multimillion-dollar client whose offshore account campaign hung over her like the sword of Damocles, and every click of the mouse echoed in her mind the doubts Sarah had planted yesterday, the words about Ethan's manipulation, his reputation for using people, and then discarding them like useless ballast, and Megan felt them eating away at her insides like acid, drop by drop, making her wonder if all that passion, all those promises of promotion and stability, had just been bait to lure her into a trap from which there was now no escape. Suddenly, the door burst open and Lisa burst in, her face red with excitement, clutching her clipboard. "Guys, this is a disaster. A client just called, they got an anonymous letter from some whistleblower, all the details about our creative accounts, and they point to Megan as the main contributor to the fraud." Lisa's words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, and everyone turned to Megan, their eyes full of surprise and suspicion, and she felt the ground shift beneath her, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of her chest, and she whispered, "What? This is impossible. I don't." But the words caught in her throat because she knew it was true that she had agreed to this deal blindly trusting Ethan, and now this whistleblower, whoever it was, maybe Sarah or someone in finance, had exposed everything, making her the culprit and not Ethan, who was standing there by the window, silent, his face impenetrable, like a mask, behind which she suddenly saw not a lover, but a cunning manipulator willing to sacrifice her to save himself. Ethan finally turned, his voice calm, too calm for the storm, and he said, "Calm down, everyone. This must be a misunderstanding. Megan, you know you initiated these accounts, right? I just approved your ideas, but the details are your responsibility." His words hit her like a slap in the face, and she jumped up, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying, Ethan? You came up with this whole thing. You pressured me, promised me promotions, stability, told me you had it all under control. I trusted you." The room froze, his colleagues looked at each other, and Ethan raised his hands as if calming a child. "Megan, don't make a scene. You took charge of the project, you signed the documents yourself. I can't take over your decisions." She felt tears stinging her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of rage, because in that moment she realized that all his promises were empty, like balloons that burst with the first injection, and his charisma, which had captivated her for months, was just a tool to exploit her talent, her devotion, and then pull away, leaving her to drown alone in this swamp of fraud, where her name was now on an anonymous letter, and a client was probably already calling the legal department, and her entire career, her entire life, was crumbling like a house of sand under a wave. "You're lying, Ethan," she screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "You whispered in my ear that we were together, that this was our chance, and now you're throwing me under the bus. You manipulated me like everyone else." He sighed as if she were an unreasonable child and said, "Megan, you're overreacting. This is business. Let's discuss this in private." But she shook her head, walking out of the room. "No, Ethan. It's over. I won't let you destroy me." She retreated to her office, slamming the door behind her and sitting at her desk, her hands shaking as she typed a message to the client, trying to explain that it was a misunderstanding, but inside she knew it was too late, that the whistleblower, whoever it was, had given up all the details, including her signatures on the documents, and now her name was associated with the fraud, with the shady offshore accounts that Ethan had presented as creative, but were in fact loopholes for money laundering or tax evasion, and she, having blindly believed his promises, had become an accomplice, not realizing the legal consequences that now threatened her with fines, dismissal, maybe even prosecution. The phone rang, and it was the client, his voice sharp and angry. "Miss Carter, we have received information about your fraud. We are terminating your contract and turning the matter over to the legal department. You will answer for this." She tried to protest. "Wait, it wasn't me, it was Ethan. He..." But he cut her off. "Your signature is on all the paperwork. Don't try to shift the blame. Goodbye." She dropped the phone, her head spinning, and she thought about the kids, about Nathan, about how this deal that was supposed to bring stability was now destroying everything she had spent years building, and Ethan, who had walked away so easily, had shown his true colors, a selfish manipulator for whom she was just a pawn in his game for power and money. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Colleagues whispered behind her back. Sarah came up, her eyes full of sympathy. "Megan, I warned you. Ethan always does this, uses and then dumps. You need to talk to a lawyer, protect yourself. Megan nodded, but Sarah's words only increased her panic. I don't know what to do, Sarah. He turned everything around on me. Sarah hugged her. Gather evidence, emails, conversation records. Don't let him get away with it. Megan agreed, but inside she was seething with rage, and when Ethan walked into her office in the evening, his face was calm, as if nothing had happened. She jumped up. How could you, Ethan? You said we were together, and now you're leaving me alone. He closed the door. His voice was quiet but cold. Megan, calm down. This is business. You agreed to the project yourself. She stepped closer, her eyes flashing. You manipulated me. Your gifts, your kisses, your promises, all of it was just to get me into this scam. You used me like everyone else, he sighed, looking away. You're exaggerating. I gave you a chance and you failed. Now I have to save the company. She laughed bitterly. Save yourself, you mean? You're a coward, Ethan. All your words were as empty as your promises. I'm leaving and I'll tell everyone the truth. He grabbed her hand. Don't do anything stupid, Megan. It will ruin us both. But she pulled away. No, it will ruin you. I'm tired of being your pawn. She walked out, leaving him alone, and she felt the cracks in her life become an abyss. But in that rage, there was also the strength to fight. At home, the evening was a minefield. Emma and Jake were eating dinner, chatting about their business, but Nathan sat silently, his face stone-faced, and Megan could feel his eyes following her every move, as if he were waiting to detonate a bomb in his hands. She tried to act normal, asking the kids about school. Emma, how's your painting for the competition? Jake, are you ready for the match? The kids responded, their voices full of enthusiasm, but Nathan suddenly said, Kids, go to your rooms. Mom and I need to talk. His tone was so heavy that Emma and Jake exchanged glances and left, and Megan felt a chill run down her spine. Nathan pulled a folder out of a drawer and threw it on the table. This is from a detective. Photos, conversations, even a video. You and Ethan at a hotel, in his car, in his office. Explain, Megan. She looked at the photo of her and Ethan hugging at the entrance to the hotel, their faces close, too close for their colleagues, and her heart sank. Nathan, this isn't what it seems. He stood up, his voice rising. It's not what it seems. You've been lying to me for months. The late work, the gifts you hide, and now this. You're sleeping with him, right? With your boss. She began to cry, her voice shaking. Yes, but that was a mistake. He manipulated me, promised me everything, and now he's dumped me with this deal that ruins everything. Nathan slammed his fist on the table. A deal. Not only are you cheating, but you're also involved in a scam. Have you thought about the children, about us? I trusted you, Megan, and you destroyed our family. She came closer, tears streaming down her face. Forgive me, Nathan. I was blind. I thought he saw me, and you. You were always busy with work. He pulled away. Don't blame me. You chose him, his lies. I want a divorce, Megan. I can't live with a traitor. His words were like a knife, and she fell to her knees. No, please, give me a chance to fix this, for the sake of the children. But he went into the bedroom, slamming the door, and she was left on the floor, sobbing, realizing that the breaking point had been passed, and her life, full of lies and illusions, was now in ruins, and the way back seemed impossible. Megan felt like she was in a minefield, where every step could be her last. After that scene in the conference room, she locked herself in her office, trying to collect her thoughts, and called Ethan, but he didn't answer. His phone was off, as if he already knew the ship was sinking and decided to jump first, leaving her alone on the deck. The client called again, his voice full of fury. Miss Carter, we have turned the case over to the police. Your signatures are on all the false reports. This is fraud. She tried to explain. Wait, this is Ethan Caldwell. He made me, But he laughed. Your boss has already contacted us, said that you acted on your own, exceeded your authority. He has recordings of you allegedly proposing these schemes. Goodbye. She dropped the phone, her world spinning, and she realized that Ethan had not only pulled away, but had set her up, faking evidence to save his own skin, and his promises, we're in this together. I'll protect you, were as empty as echoes in an empty room. She stepped out into the hallway and Sarah took her arm. Megan, go home. This isn't going to be good. Ethan's already in his office, calling the lawyers to pin this on you. Megan nodded, but inside she was seething. I'm not leaving. I'm confronting him. She burst into his office where he was sitting at his desk on the phone, and his face turned stony when he saw her. I'll call you back, he said and hung up. Megan, what are you doing here? Get out before it's too late. She stepped closer. Too late? You set me up, Ethan. You told the client I was acting alone. After everything we did, he stood up, his voice cold. Between us, it was a flirtation, Megan. And business is business. You signed the papers, you took charge of the project. She laughed hysterically. Flirt? You kissed me, whispered that you loved me, and promised a future. And now flirt? You used me, just like Sarah warned, he sighed. Sarah is a jealous old woman, and you were useful, but now, leave, or I'll call security. She turned, tears burning her eyes. You'll regret it, Ethan. I'll tell everyone the truth. But he only smiled. Try it. I have evidence on your side. At home, a storm erupted when Nathan showed the photo. This isn't a fake, Megan. The detective has been following you for weeks. You and him in a hotel on a yacht. How long has this been going on? She sat up, her voice weak. Months. But it's over, Nathan. He used me. He screamed. Used? You cheated on me, on our family. The kids ask why Mom is always at work and you're there with him. She began to cry. I'm sorry, I was stupid. I thought he saw me, and you. You're always at the clinic. He grabbed her shoulders. Don't blame me. I worked for us, for the kids, and you ruined everything. The argument went on for hours, their voices echoing off the walls, and when he said, I'm filing for divorce, she begged, no, for God's sake, give me a chance. But he left, and she was left alone, realizing that the turning point was not the end, but the beginning of the fight to save what was left. The morning was deathly quiet in the Carter house, as if time itself had stood still, leaving only the echoes of the previous night's argument that had torn through their family like lightning through old wood. Megan sat in the kitchen, clutching a cold cup of coffee, her eyes red from crying, her fingers fiddling nervously with the edge of the tablecloth as she replayed in her mind the moment when Nathan, holding the photographs from the detective, had said he was filing for divorce, his voice, full of pain and anger, still ringing in her ears like a bell announcing the end. Emma and Jake were at school, and their absence made the silence even more oppressive, because without their laughter and chatter the house seemed as empty as her heart, which was torn between the guilt of her betrayal and the rage at Ethan, whose manipulations had brought her to this point. She knew she had to talk to Nathan, confess everything, even if it meant breaking the last threads that held their marriage together, because the lies that had been building for months had become unbearable, like poison eating away at her from the inside. The door creaked and Nathan walked in, his face pale and his eyes dark with circles, as if he hadn't slept all night, and his gaze, once warm and loving, was now as cold as Lake Michigan in winter. I've packed my things, he said, putting his bag by the door. I'll stay with my brother. I'll tell the kids it's a business trip. Megan jumped up, her voice shaking. Nathan, please don't go. Let's talk. I'll tell you everything. He turned, his eyes narrowing. Tell me, now that I know, the pictures, Megan, you and him, everywhere, how could you? She stepped closer, tears streaming down her cheeks. It's my fault, Nathan. I cheated on you with Ethan. It started out as a mistake. He promised me everything, a career, love, but he used me. Forgive me, please. I didn't mean to ruin us. Nathan clenched his fists, his voice hoarse. You think an apology will fix everything? You lied to me, to the kids, to yourself. I trusted you, and you chose him. She fell to her knees, grabbing his hand. I was blind, Nathan. He manipulated me, but I want to fight for us, for the children. He pulled his hand away, his voice shaking. I can't now, Megan. I need time. I don't know if I can forgive. He took the bag and left, slamming the door, and Megan was left on the floor, sobbing, realizing that her confession, instead of healing, had only deepened the wound, and now she was alone, without a husband, without a job, without hope. At the office, the day had started in chaos. Megan had received a letter from the agency's management, signed not by Ethan, but by an executive she barely knew, saying she was suspended pending a federal investigation launched after a client gave the FBI an anonymous whistleblower letter implicating her name as the key to an offshore banking scheme. She sat in her office, now empty, without her usual notes or photos of her children, because she'd been given an hour to pack, and her hand shook as she stuffed papers into a box, and coworkers walked past, avoiding her gaze as if she were contaminated. Sarah walked in, her face serious. "Megan, I heard. It's terrible. Ethan put it all on you, didn't he?" Megan nodded, her voice weak. "He said it was my idea. He has tapes of me suggesting schemes. He set me up, Sarah." Sarah squeezed her hand. "You have to fight. Collect all the letters, messages, notes. He's not the first one he's set up like this. I've heard stories about others he uses people and then dumps them like trash." Megan looked at her, her eyes lit up with determination. "Do you know anything specific? If I have proof, I can expose him." Sarah nodded. "There's a woman, Linda. She worked here 5 years ago. Ethan fired her, accusing her of financial fraud, but there were rumors that he himself organized it all. I can contact her." Megan wrote down the number, feeling a spark of hope mixed with rage ignite within her. "Thank you, Sarah. I won't let him get away with it, even if it costs me my freedom." That evening, sitting in her empty house, Megan began digging through Ethan's past, her laptop open to a dozen tabs, old articles, social media profiles, forums of former agency employees. She found Linda Marshall, the woman Sarah said Ethan had hurt, and wrote to her. "Linda, my name is Megan Carter, and I work at Caldwell and Partners. I need your help. Ethan set me up, just like I think he did to you." An hour later, she replied, "Megan, I've been waiting years for this letter. Ethan ruined my career by blaming me for something he orchestrated. Let's meet tomorrow." Megan agreed, her heart pounding, because she knew this wasn't just revenge, it was a fight for the truth, for her name, for her family, which she had destroyed but still hoped to save. The next day, she met Linda at a cafe on the outskirts of Chicago, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the dampness of the autumn air. Linda, a woman in her 40s, with tired eyes but a firm voice, began. "Ethan Caldwell is a master manipulator. He got me involved in a project with shady accounts, promised me a raise, and then when it all came to light, he blamed me. I had evidence, letters, recordings, but I was afraid to use it because he threatened to sue." Megan frowned. "Threatened? With what?" Linda sighed. "He said he would destroy my reputation, that he had connections in the courts, in the press. I left, lost everything. But you have a chance, Megan. Collect everything you have, messages, calls, documents. He is not as invulnerable as he seems." Megan pulled out her phone, showing Linda the messages from Ethan. "Here, he wrote to me about the deal, promised that everything was under control." Linda nodded. "That's evidence. But you need a lawyer, and fast. The FBI is on the agency's tail, and Ethan will be looking for a scapegoat." Megan clenched her fists. "I won't let him get away. I'll tell you everything, even if I get arrested." Linda looked at her with respect. "You are brave, but be prepared, he will fight to the end." Back home, Megan began collecting evidence. She copied all the emails from Ethan where he mentioned offshore accounts, saved the messages where he called her his star and promised protection, and even found old recordings of conversations she had secretly made when she began to suspect his manipulations. She knew it was dangerous, that exposing Ethan could lead to her own arrest, but the thought of him getting away with it was unbearable, like a knife in her chest. She called the lawyer Sarah recommended, and after listening to her, he said, "Megan, you have evidence, but it's a risk. If you give it to the FBI, they could use it against you. Are you ready?" She answered firmly, "I'm ready. He ruined my life. I won't let him do this to anyone else." Meanwhile, Nathan hadn't called or written, and his absence was like a void that was consuming her. She wrote to him, "Nathan, I know I don't deserve to be forgiven, but I'm fighting for the truth. Please give me a chance to explain when you're ready." There was no reply, but she could see that he'd read the message, and it gave her a glimmer of hope that their marriage, like an old house, could be repaired even if the foundation was cracked. The children noticed their father's absence, and Emma asked over dinner, "Mom, why isn't Dad home? Will he come back?" Megan squeezed her hand, her voice shaking. "He'll be back, sweetheart. We just need time." But inside, she feared that time was working against her, that Nathan, devastated by her betrayal, had already passed the point where forgiveness was possible. The next day at the office, Megan learned that the FBI had called Ethan in for questioning, and he was joking around with his coworkers as if nothing had happened, but his eyes were cold as steel when he saw her. She approached him in the hallway. "Ethan, I know you set me up, but I have proof, your letters, your messages. I'll give them to the FBI." He smiled, but there was a threat in his smile. "You think they'll believe you? I have connections, Megan. You'll drown, and I'll stay afloat." She stepped closer, her voice firm. "You're wrong. I'm not alone. Linda, your other victims will tell the truth. You'll lose." He laughed. "Try it, Megan. But remember, I have tapes of you agreeing to everything." She turned to leave. "We'll see, Ethan. We'll see." At that moment, she realized that her retribution was not only a fight for herself, but for everyone he had destroyed, and even if it cost her freedom, she was willing to pay that price to stop him. At home, she sat in the dark, looking at pictures of her children, thinking about how her life, once full of love and dreams, had turned into a battlefield where every step could be her last. She wrote a letter to the FBI, attaching all the evidence, and sent it, knowing this was the point of no return. Her phone buzzed a message from Nathan. "I got your letter. I'm not ready to talk yet, but I read it. Give me time." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope, as faint as the first ray of sunshine after a long night, and Megan clutched the phone, whispering, "I'll wait, Nathan. I'll fix what I can." The reckoning was painful, but it gave her the strength to stand up and fight, even if the whole world was against her. The silence in the Carter house was deafening, like the calm before a storm, as Megan sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of printed emails, screenshots of text messages, and recorded conversations that she had collected with manic determination, like an archaeologist digging through the ruins of her own life to find the truth that would either save her or destroy her forever. The light from her desk lamp cast long shadows on the walls, and every sound the creak of a floorboard, the distant hum of a car outside the window made her flinch, because she knew the FBI was already breathing down her neck, and Ethan, with his connections and his lying records, still held the strings of her fate in his hands. Emma and Jake were asleep upstairs, their innocent dreams the only thing keeping Megan from falling into total despair, but the absence of Nathan, who had been staying with his brother for a week now, was an open wound that bled every time she remembered his last words. "I don't know if I can forgive." She opened her laptop, where a draft of a letter to the FBI was waiting, the dossier on Ethan she had compiled with the help of Sarah and Linda, and her fingers hovered over the keyboard, because sending it meant not only exposing Ethan, but also risking her own role in the deal leading to arrest, the loss of her job, and possibly her freedom. She closed her eyes, and the faces of her children, their trusting smiles, and Nathan, who, despite the pain, was still the only one she wanted to spend the rest of her life with, if he was ever going to give her a chance to redeem himself, came into her mind. The phone vibrated, and Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Megan, are you home?" "I found something else." Sarah's voice was tense, but there was a sense of determination in it. "Old files from the archive where Ethan discussed offshore accounts with the CFO. Your name wasn't mentioned in them. This might help." Megan clutched the phone, her voice shaking. "Sarah, are you sure? If I give this to the FBI, they could still charge me. I signed the paperwork." Sarah responded quickly, "You signed, but he pressured you. We have your notes where he promises protection. Plus, Linda has agreed to testify. You're not alone, Megan. Megan felt tears sting her eyes. Thank you, Sarah, but I'm scared. If I talk, it could ruin everything, my family, my life. Sarah paused, then said, and if you keep quiet, Ethan gets away scot-free, and you'll live with that for the rest of your life. What's worse? The words hit her like a blow, and Megan whispered, I'll think about it. I'll decide tomorrow. She hung up the phone, looking at the folder of evidence, her heart torn between fear and duty, because the truth could be her redemption, but also her downfall. The next day, she met with her lawyer, Mr. Cohen, a man with tired eyes and a firm voice, who listened to her story and leafed through her file. Megan, you have some serious evidence, he said, tapping his pen on the table. Correspondence, notes, Linda's testimony. It might convince the FBI to focus on Ethan, but you have to understand, you signed the documents. They could charge you with complicity. If you testify, I might negotiate a deal with the prosecutor, but there are no guarantees. Megan clasped her hands, her voice quiet. What if I don't say anything? What then? Cohen looked her in the eye. Then Ethan will likely get away with it, and you'll remain under suspicion. The FBI is already digging, and they'll find you. It's best to talk on your own terms. She nodded, but her thoughts were racing. I just wanted the best for my family. He promised me everything, a promotion, stability, and now I could lose my children, my husband. Cohen put his hand on her shoulder. You made a mistake, Megan, but the truth is your only chance to fix it. Decide quickly, the trial is in 3 days. She walked out of his office feeling the world closing in around her, and every decision she made to speak or to remain silent felt like a razor's edge. That night, she sat with Emma and Jake at dinner, trying to smile as they talked about school, but their questions about Nathan, Mom, when is Dad coming home, cut her like a knife. She answered softly, Soon, honey. He's just busy. But a lie, even a small one, was like poison, and she realized she couldn't lie to them or to herself anymore. Later, after the kids had gone to bed, she texted Nathan. I'm going to court to tell the truth about Ethan. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'm doing this for us, for the kids. Please come to court. I need your support. She sent the text without expecting a response, but an hour later he texted, I'll be there, not for you, for the truth. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a thread she could cling to, and she went to bed with a thought that perhaps there was still a chance, however faint, like the first snow that melts under her fingers. The morning of the trial was cold, the sky over Chicago gray, and Megan stood before the mirror in her best suit, looking at herself as if she were a stranger, a woman whose life had fallen apart because of her own mistakes, but who still hoped to pick up the pieces. In the courtroom, she sat next to Cohen, her hands shaking as she looked at Ethan standing on the opposite side, his suit impeccable, his smile confident, as if he already knew he was going to get away with it. The judge, an older woman with a stern face, called the hearing to begin, and the prosecutor called Megan to the witness stand. She stood up, feeling all eyes on her Ethan, the prosecutor, Nathan in the back row, and her heart pounding like a drum before a battle. The prosecutor began, Mrs. Carter, tell the court about your role in the offshore account campaign. Megan swallowed, her voice weak but firm. I was involved, but not on my own. Ethan Caldwell, my supervisor, convinced me to sign the paperwork, promising promotion and protection. He said it was all legal. Ethan jumped up. That's a lie. She acted independently. I just approved her ideas. The judge banged her gavel. Mr. Caldwell, sit down. Megan continued, her voice growing stronger. I have evidence, emails, messages, recordings of him giving instructions. He manipulated me, just like he did other employees before me. The prosecutor filed her file, and the judge looked at it carefully, her brows furrowing. Megan looked at Nathan, his face unreadable, but there was something new in his eyes, not forgiveness, but perhaps understanding. Ethan, called next, spoke smoothly, his voice like honey. Megan is talented, but ambitious. She came up with these schemes to stand out. I trusted her as a leader. Megan clenched her fists, her voice escaping, "You're lying, Ethan. You used me, like Linda, like the others. I have her testimony." The courtroom buzzed, and Linda, seated among the witnesses, nodded in affirmation. The judge banged her gavel again. "Silence! Mrs. Carter, go ahead." Megan told everything about the meetings at the hotel, about his promises, about how he set her up, and with every word she felt the web of lies she was caught in tearing, but so did her defense, because she was admitting her guilt. The prosecutor asked, "Do you realize that your actions could result in criminal liability?" She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, but I want the truth, even if I have to pay for it." Nathan looked at her, and there was a shadow of pain in his gaze, mixed with something that might have been respect. The judge called a break, and Megan walked out into the hallway where Nathan was waiting for her. He looked tired, but his voice was softer than before. "You did it. You told the truth. I didn't expect it." She looked him in the eyes. "Nathan, I ruined everything, but I want to fix it. For the children, for us." He sighed. "I don't know, Megan. You broke my heart. But I saw you struggling there. Give me time." She nodded, her voice shaking. "I'll wait, as long as it takes." He left, and she was alone. But for the first time in months, she felt her burden lighter, because the truth, even the painful one, was liberating. The trial continued, with Linda testifying to Ethan's scheme, and the documents Megan had collected convinced the prosecutor to focus on him. Ethan was arrested in the courtroom, his face turning pale as the handcuffs snapped around his wrists, and he screamed, "Megan, you're going to be sorry." But she just looked at him, her eyes full of determination. "No, Ethan, you're the one who'll regret this." The judge announced that Megan's case would be tried separately, given her cooperation, and Cohen whispered to her, "That's a good sign. Maybe a plea deal with the prosecutor will keep you out of jail." But Megan knew her biggest battle wasn't with the court, it was with her family, with Nathan, with herself. She went home to find her children waiting for her, and Emma hugged her. "Mom, are you okay?" Megan smiled, genuinely for the first time. "I will, honey. We will." She knew the outcome was uncertain. The trial could be merciful or harsh. Nathan could come back or leave forever, but her choice in court, her truth, had given her a chance at redemption, even if ruin still loomed on the horizon. She looked at the picture of their family on the wall and whispered, "I'll do anything to bring you back." The future was foggy, but in that fog, for the first time in a long time, there was light. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.